Hello, I'm 𝗪𝗔𝗧𝗖𝗛, Senior Internal Audit Advisor for Audit Board. Welcome to another in my series, Agents of Change, where I speak with leading internal auditors and professionals from the risk management field about what does it take to be an agent of change in the field of internal audit in the 21st century. I'm joined today by an old friend and colleague, Paul Sobel. Paul is currently the chairman of COSO, the committee of the sponsoring organizations of the Treadway Commission. But before Paul served in that role, he was the chief risk officer for Georgia Pacific, the chief audit executive at Georgia Pacific, the chief audit executive of 𝗪𝗏, and the chief audit executive of 𝗪𝗞𝗘. Paul, great to have you here today. I think I knew you in every one of those roles, so we've known each other for a really long time.
Yeah, that's probably right. Well, pleasure to be here, and I guess I'm finally at an age where I don't mind being called an old friend and colleague now.
I think old for me is just that we've known each other for so long,
Yes, we have.
that we've got a lot of great memories. Paul, you know, I wrote this book, Agents of Change, that was published earlier this year by the IIA, and the thesis of the book is that to be successful in the 21st century, internal auditors have to be more than just assurance providers, even more than advisors. They have to undertake their mission in a way that drives positive change for their organizations. I actually defined agents of change as those internal auditors who are catalysts for transformational ideas that drive and create value for the organizations they serve. How do you feel about that? Is that a definition that resonates with you?
Yeah, it really does. I think that hits the nail on the head. Particularly the words catalyst for transformation. You know, so often people let change happen to them and then they say, see, I can handle change, but that's not what you're talking about at all. You're talking about people who can be the catalyst for change, who can, make change happen, and I think that's extremely important in an organization, particularly these days with the rapid pace of change. We need to make sure that internal auditors aren't passed by, that they kind of get dragged along for the ride, because over time they will perhaps be viewed as not as relevant. So by being a catalyst for change, I think organizations will continue to look at them as somebody who's a valuable part of the organization beyond just the role they play as an internal auditor.
You know, Paul, having worked for so many different organizations in a number of roles, both in audit and risk management, you've obviously had exposure to management that has a different vision or view of audit along the way. Do you think management and even boards in companies today see internal audit as having that change agency role, or at least do they support internal auditors who want to be more than just the ones who hand them a report?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because certainly internal auditor has advanced beyond the green eye shade perspective. But I think there's still many who kind of view them as, they're there to be the national defense, to provide us assurance, to give us comfort. But we're all in it for the same reason, to help the organization be successful. And I believe, at least the ones I've interfaced with, board members and executives, they actually, maybe a little surprised, but they really embrace the idea that we can be agents of change within our organizations, because they know that we're not just providing them the assurance that they need, but we're trying to help the organization be successful and enhancing value in whatever way we can.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I argue in the book that before internal auditors can really be seen as change agents in the organizations they serve, they have to be change agents within internal audit. Be willing to transform the way internal audit undertakes its mission, the way it uses technology, the way that it identifies and follows risks. Are there any particular examples that you'd share where you, as a chief audit executive in several different companies along the way, that you drove change in internal audit?
Yeah, I think it's a good point that being a change agent within a company sometimes is situational, opportunity related. But within internal audit, we always have that opportunity. We can drive that change more. A couple of examples come to mind, both from Georgia Pacific. About a year after I joined the company in 2011, I recognized that as a company, and particularly internal audit, but company-wide, we weren't really taking advantage of data analytics the way that we could. And so I was able to bring somebody who had some acumen in that area over from another part of the organization. We hired a real sharp individual off campus, and we started to do some things. Now they'd be kind of common, but experimenting with Alteryx and Tableau and being able to analyze data, extract data, and present data in ways that the company hadn't really seen before. And that really, I think, raised the stature of internal audit over the ensuing years. About 5 years after that, they finally, rightfully so, said, we need to pull this out of audit and make it truly a corporate center of excellence, which they did. So that made me feel very good because I was the impetus for that, and even though we incubated it within audit, it ultimately ended up where it should be. The other thing is not quite as impressive a story, but I think it's a good example. I think it's probably 2017, as I was watching some of the potential changes that I thought were coming to the profession, I implemented an initiative. I think I called it Vision 2020. It was our vision for what we wanted to be by 2020. And we started to look into things like agile auditing, robotic process automation, artificial intelligence, things that, again, now have become a little bit more common, but back then were really just ideas, and there were some companies experimenting with it out there, but not so much. Now, I say it's not as great a story because we determined that agile auditing wasn't going to work for us based on a little bit of culture and also our audit projects. But robotic process automation, we were able to experiment with that, which again became more of a corporate initiative than just internal audit. And AI we'd started talking about, but then I moved into the chief risk officer role before we had a chance to really run with it. So yeah, I think the key is we can never be satisfied. We know the world is changing so quickly, and even if I can't make changes that are going to radically transform the company, I can do things to try and transform internal audit.
Well, excellent observation, Paul. I've had the chance to observe you as a chief audit executive and then later as a chief risk officer, and I always saw you as someone who championed change in the organizations you led. And you have served in dual roles. You have served as a chief audit executive. You have served as a chief risk officer. There's a lot of conversation these days about the importance of having a connected view of risk within a company, within an organization. How would you, as one who's kind of held both of those roles, how would you encourage internal auditors and chief risk officers to be more collaborative in supporting their organizations?
Yeah, I like that phrase, connected risk. I think that's a good way of looking at it. I know in the profession for a while we've talked more about combined assurance and terms like that, and it really does kind of come down to combined assurance. And to me, the first step is to show some humility, because I think there can be a lot of turf wars between audit and risk or audit and compliance, and there doesn't need to be. We all work for the same company. We're all up after the same objectives. And once you kind of put that behind you, it's much easier to talk to the other individual. We may have different roles and responsibilities, but we are still working with the same fundamental information. So the more we can share, the more we can collaborate, the better it will be for the company to be successful. I talk about how risks may be unknown, but they're not unknowable. And the key to that is that the more people you can kind of sit down and brainstorm with, the greater the likelihood that we'll kind of collectively come up with that, okay, maybe we couldn't foresee a worldwide pandemic like we had, but we could possibly foresee, hey, SARS happened, there were some other regionalized pandemics. I don't know what the event will be that'll be the trigger, but what if something like that does happen? What do we do? So you don't have to predict the events, you just have to predict how you'll react to the outcomes of those events. And again, an internal auditor can do it, a risk officer can do it, a compliance officer can do it, but they can do it much better by themselves. So I've just found that building relationships, going in with humility, trying to help each other be successful, really instills a sense of collaboration that can be very positive.
Great points. We've been through a lot the last couple of years. I think all of us have grown and evolved and maybe been more innovative than we even thought possible. Looking ahead, it would appear as though risks are going to be racing at high velocity, and they're going to be very volatile for years to come. Is there anything, if I ask you to pull out Paul Sobel's crystal ball and say, what are some things that internal audit needs to do to be successful in the decade ahead, what would you say?
Well, first and foremost, we have to recognize that change is going to continue to happen. The pace of change is likely to continue to accelerate. We saw an acceleration during the pandemic, but I see no reason why it will slow down. And I think one of the biggest challenges facing the profession is upskilling for what those new risks, new technologies will be. And that's not going to be easy. Some people may not be able to get there, but that'll be a key challenge. We don't all have to be experts in all of the new and latest, greatest technologies. We have to know enough to understand it and be confident enough to go get the resource when we need to. That may not be somebody you hire off the street. It may be a consultant. It may be a co-sourcing, whatever. But we have to recognize that the level of expertise needed in many of these areas is going to go beyond where most of us are today. The other thing, I'm going to flip that around and say that can also be an opportunity for internal auditors. I think back in my career, I had a couple of times when I used the phrase recreated myself. I've always been in some form of auditing, external, internal, et cetera. But early in my career, I decided I wanted to learn more about technology. I just had this brilliant idea that computers are probably here to stay. And that knowledge I gained then actually opened some doors for me and served me very well when I moved into chief audit roles later. And then in the late 1990s, I became very interested in risk assessment, and that grew into broader enterprise risk management. And so I learned more about it. I was with 𝗪𝗓𝗪 at the time, so got to work with some of the real thought leaders on the topic. And it ultimately helped me create a competency that I never would have had otherwise. So I guess my challenge to internal auditors is to seize the opportunity that's out there. You don't know exactly what it is. My crystal ball's a little fuzzy, I think, for 10 years out. But there will be opportunities for people to pursue something that may recreate themselves, that would be a little bit different. Make sure it's something you enjoy doing, and then you'd be surprised what kind of doors that'll open. And I think that's really what the profession's going to need, a bunch of people who are saying, I want to be more than the traditional view of an internal auditor, and that's what will take this profession into the next decade.
As you were talking, I tried to recall your chairman's theme at the IA. It was imagine the
possibilities.
The possibilities. And I think that sums up what you just shared.
Yeah.
That internal auditor should be imagining the possibilities and then acting on it.
Yeah. Yeah, the future is unknown, but again, not unknowable. I tell people to, try and, again, imagine the unimaginable at this point, because it doesn't mean you have to know exactly what's going to happen, but by imagining what you don't think you can imagine, it puts you in a better position to be prepared for it.
Paul, thank you for joining me today. I think you've shared some remarkable insights with our audience. It's great to reconnect and to call you one of my oldest friends in the profession. And hopefully we can do this again sometime.
I hope so. Thank you very much and enjoyed it. Really, really a great idea.